Hey, welcome back to the show. I am here with my wonderful, beautiful, and esteemed colleague, Dr. Dana Waters. Hi, Dana. How are you?
Good. How are you? And I'm here with the illustrious Dr. Gwen Palafox.
Oh,
Illustrious.
thank you. What,
Yeah.
say more, say more.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just watched the Golden Globes the other night, so that seemed to be an appropriate word. Yeah.
Oh,
Illustrious.
well,
Yeah.
can I just say, I'm really late to the game, but I've recently gotten into Lizzo's
Yeah.
special album. And it spoke to me, and it's so positive, and
Yeah.
there's like a few songs on that album that I'm like totally they just really resonate with me.
Yeah.
And she won
Yeah.
record of the year, and I was so happy for her.
There was so much great. I mean, that show is sort of dovetails with our podcast because there's so much representation. I think you see in the Grammys more than anything else. You know, the first trans person won the duo, and just some really cool stuff going on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so. And I love music, and I think music is just kind of another form of a really emotional expression, and I absolutely love music, and I just love her positivity, and I love her as an artist. I mean, what I see anyway. I don't know her personally, but if she wanted to get to know me personally,
you wouldn't fight it.
No, are you crazy? I would be like, wow, look at us. We just going all over the place.
Look at us going off topic and having attentional issues, which is a good segue to talking about, what were we going to talk about again? What was it?
Wait, what a minute. Wait. Motivation, Dana.
Motivation.
Oh, yeah.
Oh God, what a loaded word.
Oh God. I think this word is catching me at a very interesting part or time of my life, personally, just kind of resetting my intentions for the year and making sure I am intentional in my own life and my professional life. But it's just it's a topic that comes up regularly, whether I'm consulting in a school team or a family or even with a client themselves. This idea that motivation is this magical this magical thing that exists to do the things that we need to do.
Yeah. Let me find the button. If I push the right button, and then especially if we're talking about kids, I would imagine it gets inordinately even more complicated. I mean, I certainly, even though I wasn't diagnosed as a kid, had motivation. For those listening, I'm doing the air quotes issues, but you and I were talking before we came on, and I really think motivation's an interesting thing. So you have to have attention to have motivation. And in order to have attention, it has to be something you're interested in, right? And then you can talk about like sustaining attention. And if we're talking about neurodiverse folks, autism, ADHD, OCD, name it, that is like the professional hijacker of attention and motivation. If you're focusing on something you're really into, yeah, great. But if you're not, or if you're really into something and now you have to like change and go to the next class or something in school, now all of a sudden you're having to shift what you were really into. And it's such an internal state too, right? I mean, it's not something that you can do something external and make someone be motivated, right?
Well, oh my God. I mean, how much time do we have, right?
Yeah.
There's a few things that come up for me, in ABA, we've got this idea of, well, if they're not intrinsically motivated, you have to extrinsically motivate them with something. And and I understand that conceptually. And we all use carrots, as reinforcement, and that's fine. But I guess for me, it's like, we got to still ask, is the thing that we're asking this person to do or the place where we're asking them to work,
Right.
to do something that's difficult, because usually
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're doing in those situations. Is it meaningful to them?
Right. Yeah. Is it meaningful to them? And are they going to be distracted by something else? I mean, that's the other thing that comes to
Yeah.
mind for me with neurodiverse
Yeah.
folks with motivation and attention is it's all fine and good if you're zip wired in and you're paying attention to something, but if there's things coming at you to pull your attention away, one of my clients, I think it said yesterday and really named it sort of well, it's like I'm carrying an extra load, right? So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people have probably seen these various videos where they try to show what it's like to have heightened sensory issues. I think it's like in a diner and there's two people that go out to lunch or something, and the audio is normal audio, and then it's what an autistic would experience, and you hear the plates
Yeah.
clanking and people talking, and it's really hard to pay attention to that one, what the person is saying. So that, I think, that alone has such a yoke on attention, and that might be external. And then there's all the stuff going on internal, right? That we know has a larger voice, takes more attention away from folks who are neurodiverse. So to say, I'm just going to give you the carrot and make you motivate, and then the L word, the lazy word, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're unable to sustain that attention or motivate yourself, there's automatically something wrong with you, rather than thinking this person might not be into this. It really goes back to kind of like Psych 101 that we've defunct a lot of, like things that Freud said and so on, but there were some really good ideas in there. And this idea of resistance gets pathologized, like, oh, I don't want to do that for this deep-seated reason. And it comes down to, I'm not into it, or I'm not feeling well, or I don't have the resources for that right now, right? And that motivation just isn't there. That's what's so damaging about ABA, I think, because I'm going to withhold something from you that does really motivate you in order to make you do this other thing,
That may
right?
not motivate you.
That may not motivate you. Yeah, we're teaching you how to do that, right?
I mean,
Teaching.
Teaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that the idea of motivation too, right, Dana, like even conceptually, is
Mm-hmm.
that it's acting in service of something else. Like it's acting in
Mm-hmm.
service of a goal that we've set for ourselves. Sometimes that goal is a little bit farther out of our reach, right? It's more of maybe of a long-term goal. Like I think
Mm-hmm.
about there, I immediately think about health-related goals, right? Like
Yeah.
health-related goals are something that we don't experience the result of immediately.
Right.
It's cumulative and over time. But this question of even if it's even if it's a speech therapy session or an ABA session or a whatever session,
Mm-hmm.
is the goal, is the outcome, is that activity something that person wants? Like,
Yeah.
you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Do
Because if
they
it's
want it?
not,
Yeah.
right, then
Exactly.
if it's
Yeah.
not, we can't then say this person's unmotivated. Like,
Good point.
right?
Yep. Yep.
So the other piece too, like when I'm working with young adults who they're launching, into their lives, they're launching
Mm-hmm.
into adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
and their parents want to really launch them. I mean, I feel like it's like a catapult, like boom,
Get
we,
out. Yeah.
right? We really need like a runway that like goes around the globe a few times,
There you go.
before
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
like pick
Yeah.
up, we kind of pull up into the air. And it's like, oh, they're not motivated to do laundry. They're not motivated to eat healthy. They're not
Mm-hmm.
motivated to get a job. They're not motivated, whatever.
Yeah.
And, I've been having big reactions as a therapist. And so, whenever therapists have big reactions, we got to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's, for me, it's like, this isn't motivational.
Right.
This is, does this person feel like they have a voice and a sense of agency in their life?
Mm-hmm.
Because if that's been squashed, deflected, diminished, why would they then speak up for themselves? Why would they do that?
Yeah, it's a barrier, because it's a barrier. If they've been squashed and their prior learning is negative, why would you do it again? If you if you do something and you give it your all and you think you've done a good job and someone smacks you upside the head and calls you stupid, why would you try again? That's not
Yeah.
motivation. That's just understandable.
Well, that's adaptive.
Yeah, adaptive is another word for
Right?
that.
Like
Yeah.
it's absolutely like adaptive, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But then what sucks is then it's the person that gets misunderstood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, the person, and that's where I think the damage and the harm comes in.
Right.
That's where the shame comes in.
Yeah.
This is where learned helplessness comes in, depression comes in, anxiety comes in. Like this is where
Mm-hmm.
we see these things. I think the other place that I see this, where there's a air quote lack of motivation or
Mm-hmm.
an unmotivated individual, is when they've been in a system where other people have been making the decisions for them most of their life.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
maybe it's not squashed or diminished, or and maybe it is diminished, but maybe it's not like an active, like, no, you
Mm-hmm.
don't matter, you don't know, I know better than you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's even a system where there's people who are very active that have more resources to make the decisions in that person's life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I
Yeah.
see this sometimes in very, very well-meaning parents,
Right.
who really want and desire for their kiddo to be successful and independent and autonomous, as adults, but in their zeal and zest of creating the environment that is needed, we forget that over time that needs to be turned back over, or
Yeah.
that adolescent needs to be brought in to be making some of their own decisions, to be solving some of their own problems, to be getting that
Right.
practice before we say, oh,
Mm-hmm.
congratulations, you've gotten your diploma, see you later.
Yeah.
Like what?
Right. Right. Yeah. I agree. I mean, it's sort of as a enabling form of disabling that person if you're not
Yeah.
letting them. Well, if you're not letting them make their own decisions, and in a way, the other thing that I was thinking of when you were talking was, it's not that you save someone from failure, because that can happen in those instances. Like, oh, I'm going to help you so you don't fail. It's how the failure is framed, right? If the failure is, see, you screwed up again, you're terrible, you can't do anything right, versus, wow, that was, you worked so hard. I think sports do a really good job of this. When you hear professional athletes like not win a championship, they're totally bummed, but they're like, we gave it our all. I know I gave it everything I had, so I did the best I can. And it, to some people, it feels like a cop out, but to me, it feels like a healthier frame, because you can't always succeed. And these small wins are good to get that sense of agency internal, absolutely, as like you're raising kids, right? And then I keep coming up with this idea of what are the barriers. So there's those external barriers that have to do with systems and schools and parents and whoever. And then there's the internal barriers that are, like I said before, you're carrying a heavy load already. So how much attention do you have? How tired are you? How much can you attend to something? Are you really into this? You were into it for a month and now you've burned out on it. If you really took a deep dive into that. And then what you were saying, it's all about this sort of judging from the outside. We started talking about Lizzo, right? And how she actually did not set out to be a body positive, like, archetype. She just is, and people grabbed onto it because there's such need for that, for representation of any kind of diversity, and to normalize it and to not judge it and say, yeah, this is part of what a human body can do. Why are we judging that and saying that's horrible and lazy and disgusting or whatever, right? So that same thing with motivation is getting the internal story about it. What exactly is going on? And it's so complex. I can think about, my own schooling. I've shared in here before, I did terrible up until halfway through high school. And a lot of it was like what you started out with, which was, is the end in sight? Is the payoff? Can I even see the carrot? And in school, like, oh, you do this reading and do all the studying, whatever, and then then you get a test on it at the end of the quarter or whatever, end of the semester. I always started out with such high hopes, the new binder and new pencils and all this stuff. And I didn't sort of get the sense of mile markers that I could shoot for. It just felt like this enormous thing from the beginning to the end, and there wasn't anywhere in between that were like motivators, right? I'm really careful to do that with my students, and I think good education does that, where if it's quizzes or checking in to see how much you learned, or, you know, that's that structure piece. Like, okay, if I read this chapter, I can check that off on the syllabus, and I know I've read that chapter and taken those notes. So it really has nothing to do with motivation. It has to do with how do you do this? And that, in my experience, has been really, it's at the base of what lack of motivation is it's those feelings of shame, like you said, like I can't do this. Or no one's really disarticulated it, showed it to me in a way that's achievable, like these small steps, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dana, this is what I've been helping my clients and the systems that I'm working within understand about motivation. I'm like, motivation is mood-based. It's heavily mood-based. You also said, it's based on private factors, internal factors that you can't see.
Right.
Which is why I feel like, this is why this is a very challenging concept when you have a very rigid ABAer. And it's because you don't take into account those personal, internal, private things that are happening when we actually have to. If we're going to think about people, we've talked about this from like a biopsychosocial idea or framework, that we must think about personal characteristics, internal characteristics, my neurobiology, what's happening inside, what's happening on the outside, right? All of these factors together. But something that I've been saying to my clients is motivation is not the starting point of change. Motivation comes after you've had momentum. So really, I think behavior change, and when I say behavior change, I just mean even if it's like learning a new skill, right? Because it's still
for sure.
Okay. So in order to utilize motivation, the first thing we need to do is determine if the goal is meaningful and attainable to the person, but most of all, meaningful and interesting to the person. And the second piece is then we must really identify the entry point, which inevitably is some sort of planning, motor planning, stepwise planning, first step. And then what happens is if we provide consistent, meaningful opportunities to start the chain, to start the action, you will see that motivation will maintain it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm thinking about working out, right? We were talking about that before we started.
Yes.
I have a lot of physical issues that I have always been a worker-outer. But I work out every morning, even when I'm traveling. I make sure the place has a gym. And that started out for me with it made me feel better in terms of some of the joint issues that I have. I have EDS and I have a spinal fusion, and some of those things really help that. At first, no, I'd go to the physical therapist. They say, do these things. And if you don't get reward right away, and sometimes it gets worse, would be, like you're studying hard and it hurts to study and this sucks and I hate it. But then you do really well on a test and you get a good grade. And for me, it's like, oh, this actually does help alleviate my pain. I feel better. And then, like you said, so I'm in that first chain. I tolerate it long enough to get that payoff, right? And then it's like, oh, now I've got agency. Now I've got efficacy. Now I have the sense of there is something I can do about it. And then once it gets in routine, now you really have it, right? And that doesn't mean there aren't days where I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this, or I'm tired, or whatever. That's, like you said, mood states can affect that, right?
Yeah.
But absolutely, that entry point, and it sounds like such a simple, easy fix, but I think that's the hardest definition, is where do you enter, right? And does it matter to you to enter? Like spelling, I was always terrible at spelling, and now we have spell check. And I was never motivated to be a good speller. I just didn't care. I mean, honestly, when I look back on it, I'm like, it sucked to get a bad grade, but I didn't care, right? Go to shop class, make something really cool with wood. Damn, I would have done that all damn day. I loved it, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, and that sense of
And
no, we have
there
to
was
do it.
math involved.
And
There
there
was
was math
math involved in
involved.
shop
Yeah,
class.
exactly. That's right. And physical coordination was really important.
Yep.
Planning. We had to do a
Yep.
plan and so that's a really good example of a plan for one thing I'm totally disinterested in. But I can take that idea of planning and carrying something out in a pond that I really enjoy and love, right? And
Yep.
that now all of a sudden the motivation's there because I'm interested in it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I just wish people would, not use motivation as a way to understand
yeah. Like that
somebody
is the
else.
problem.
That's
Yeah.
right. The problem is full stop, unmotivated.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
unmotivated has the synonyms and connotations of lazy, not
Yeah.
caring, um, um, disinterested, not engaged in life, a no good. I mean, like we could come
Oh my
up with all of
God.
those things, and
Yeah.
we've. It's the same thing as like you and I talking about labels and
Yeah.
labelism.
Yeah.
Don't use one label. Don't use
Mm-hmm.
one word to
Mm-hmm.
understand somebody,
Yeah.
or to give reason for something.
Yeah.
Like, I would challenge you to come up with 5, and hopefully they're different. Not the same word, because you could be like unmotivated,
It's so
lazy, not
easy to come up with
caring,
those bad words. They flow
right?
easily.
But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
how about this one? How about something that, I mean, I use a lot as a therapist, which is, what else could that mean?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I went to the Adler School for my doctorate, and we learned a lot of different ways to look at things than kind of mainstream psych does. And Adler had this brilliant idea, and I still think of it. It's along those same lines. Well, he called it, "What is the goal of the misbehavior?" Which is kind of pathologizing. And I'll just look at it now as, what is the goal of the behavior? And the trick is to figure out what the real goal is, because that tells you what's intrinsically going on. So if I don't want to do something and I just say I'm not motivated, motivation is the label, like you said, it's the judgment, it's whatever. Even if you said, well, why am I not motivated? Or what is stopping me? And I might say something like, I'm tired, or I'm hungry, or I'm bored, I'm not into it, or I don't feel like I know how to get from point A to point Z. I need some help
Yeah.
identifying all, right? So
Yeah.
almost always, if you just look at, and people can talk all day long. I mean, we could fill up an entire podcast with just negative judgment words. I don't think we'd have any problem doing that, which is
No.
telling, right?
Easy.
But
Yeah.
if you look at what is really going on, we also learned, Adler said, trust only movement. And what he meant by that was, don't get caught up in what the person's saying. Don't get caught up in all the language and all of that. Look at what the person's doing. That's the purest indicator of what's going on inside. So if someone's putting on the brakes and saying, I don't want to do this, and it's being labeled as motivation, no, they just don't want to do it. Now you have to ask, why don't you want to do it? What are the barriers, right? Because to me, you could pathologize and say, oh, they're doing that because they're stubborn and they want to show me that I'm not right and they're getting back at me. And it's like, really? They just don't want to do it. And you're doing nothing to ask them what's going on internally about that. We do this in dog training, for God's sakes, and we don't even afford the same thing for kids. Is what is having that animal behave in the way they're behaving right now? And you don't get into they're revenge, or they're sitting there plotting my demise. Oh, for God's sakes. They just don't want to do it. Or there isn't a big enough reward, or they can't see the reward, or there's too many steps to get to the reward. I mean, we know that in basic behavioral training. And yet we don't do it with kids. I just don't get it. I don't understand it.
Yeah, we don't afford it to humans.
Yeah. Yeah,
And,
well, that's true. And
kids, in kids, there's more harm and damage that can be done with that.
We just take the behavioral modification and say, well, I'm going to modify you, rather than saying, what's going on internally? How do I pull this person along to be interested? And the first step to that is going to have to be asking them, You even do this with dogs. Like my dog that I had a long time ago was very hard to train because she wasn't treat motivated. She didn't like treats. She just wouldn't eat them. So, and I was at a loss, and I had a fair amount of experience with this. I had to go talk to a professional trainer because I'm like, what am I? And she identified for me, this dog's motivation in life is to be near you and to love you. And so that became the motivator. She didn't do what I wanted her to do. We literally had to do like this timeout where we put her in the bathroom for 8 seconds. And then she'd come out and she was yoked. Like, okay, what am I supposed to do? A treat. She's like, I don't want it. I don't care.
Right. Right.
So that's a really good example of like, people are like that too. Different things are going to appeal to that person. Different things are going to be interesting to that person. And how do you give that then to that person? And I think learning is so complex. I mean, when you really get into learning theory, there's so much to it that I don't think ABAers are even learning any of that at all.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. We are so complex, and I mean, a little bit of a different wiring here, a different little bit of wiring here creates, all of these very heterogeneic or highly variable kinds of expressions,
Right.
which are not wrong. I mean,
Right.
that's the heart of the neurodiversity movement, right? There's not just one right way of being, thinking, doing, learning, socializing, talking. Like, come on.
Yep.
And so,
Yep.
I think, this idea of motivation though is really, really, it's like this catchphrase for, it's not even a phrase, but it's like, it's a scapegoat word. I don't know. Like,
I like that. It is a scapegoat word.
Like, just stop. Like, everyone stop using the word motivation when you're good, when you're going to describe someone else. If you want to use it for yourself, and you want to say, you know what, I'm feeling very unmotivated to X. Fine. That's your self-expression. Please do not use the word motivation to describe someone else's experience when you are not in that body. I mean,
I totally agree. Yeah.
Maybe
totally.
That's the piece. Like, come up with words that demonstrate your understanding of you, the greater understanding of the situation.
That's right.
Before we just like land that unmotivated word.
Right.
You and I could go on. I am hot on this right now. I'm going to tell you the amount of times I've talked about motivation in the past couple weeks and on my teams and stuff. It's corrective, and I acted poorly in a meeting the other day because I really challenged the team with the use of this word to describe.
You didn't act poorly then. You acted awesomely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
they would have judged you.
I'm getting older, Dana. I don't really care what people think about me at this point. But totally. I just wasn't having it. I was like, get at like, no, let's not. And, I think I have to watch my own when my hackles get raised. And, for me, it's very protective. I think I was just very protective of this person. But I'm hearing it over and over and over again. And because I'm working with these launching teens, launching adults.
Oh, right.
This word is like everywhere. Yeah. They're just unmotivated.
Yeah. And I wonder if every time someone says to themselves or judges someone else as they're unmotivated, instead, like you said, we need to get rid of the word, ask yourself, what are the barriers?
Yeah.
And by barriers, I don't mean like, what are they doing it's what are the things that are getting in the way of that person task completing, because they need to be honored and looked at. Yeah. So I can think of, I'll look back now at my graduate training and I'll think, oh my God, it was so much work. How did I do that? I mean, even looking back on it now, I'm like, how did I do that? I was highly motivated to get my doctorate and to learn. And I had a system that I finally figured out and put in place to learning. But if I didn't want it, why would you put yourself through that? And it kind of reminds me of like, I've never done this, but I have friends that have done marathons. Did they get up one day and say, oh, I want to run a marathon, so I'm going to go out and run 20 miles today? Of course not. But when we say someone's unmotivated, that's kind of what we're asking. We would, even before you get out running, have you ever run before? Do you know how to run? What's it like for your body? Do you have the equipment you need to do that? right? It's the proverbial check with your doctor before you start it, right? You may even consult with someone who's a pro, and the first thing they're going to ask you is, what is your goal? My goal is to be able to run a marathon and finish it. And then they say, okay, now they work backwards. They look at what the barriers are. And they know it's not just physical barriers, because they can put a training program in place for you to overcome those physical barriers. But what are the other barriers, right? It's why people with means hire personal trainers, because doing that sort of thing hurts. Why do you want to do that? Working out, they call it working out. They don't call it playing out. There's right? So I say to my wife all the time when she's worked out, how was the workout? She's like, yeah, it was work. I'm like, yeah, good point. So those kinds of intrinsic, internal barriers or motivators, right? What can I do to get where my goal is? And sometimes the goal is so far away that you have to plan the little goals, right? I would get overwhelmed when I first started graduate school thinking about all I had to do. And I'll do this with my students now. I'm like, don't think about dissertation yet.
Oh,
you're just going to freak out.
Killer.
I'm not trying to patronize you. I really do mean it. Focus on getting your first year classes done. And then we'll start to, and that basically, that they're like, thank you. I feel like I'm doing something wrong if I'm not have that all planned, but you're telling me that's what I should do. I'm like, yeah. Focus on fall semester, and then winter, and then spring, and then summer, and then we'll talk. And that is a really good example of how it's mapped out. And it's mapped out because the goal is so huge, right? Yeah. It's huge. And so if you've got someone that's having barriers to motivation, like you're trying to launch this team, that's a massive barrier.
It's massive because oh my God. I mean, just thinking about when you said dissertation, by the way, I had a visceral reaction in my body.
Of course. Yeah, I'll do some EMDR on you to get you over the trauma.
Please. Yeah. Everyone can watch you clear my information channels.
There you go.
Such a nerd. Just a nerdy inside joke.
Yeah.
If you know EMDR, then you.
Some listeners will be smiling right now. Yeah.
But overwhelm not only comes from your external environment. Overwhelm also comes from your thinking.
Oh yeah.
So we got to break these things down. And gosh, as you're talking about graduate school and that was a while ago for me. But man, I remember really struggling through my dissertation. I mean, I remember having to write out the supporting evidence for my dissertation, on each fact on a note card, and then arranging it in. I really wish I had a picture of this because I arranged it.
I did the same technique with the note cards.
And it took up the whole floor.
Yep.
And I just was like, I can't let my dog in here. No one can come in here. But I really needed to do that and organize it and look at it. Yeah. Then I stacked them and then I wrote from note cards. Yeah. And writing is hard for me. And as a psychologist, we do a lot of writing, actually, more writing than if you're thinking about psychology, be prepared.
There's a lot of writing. Yeah.
There's a lot of writing. This is the only way that you demonstrate your critical thinking and your application of ideas to other frameworks and theories and stuff. But writing was not easy for me. It was one of and I just didn't, I didn't slow down enough to even realize that about myself.
Yeah.
And I was very motivated to finish school and, and become a psychologist. And so that really did bring me through. But
you also had some tools, right? So I learned that system from an English 101 teacher when I went back undergrad, and it was life-changing for me because someone gave me a system now on how to organize thoughts, how to research thoughts, how to capture all that information, and then arrange it literally on the floor. I did the same thing, and I had cats, so I'd lock the cats up. And it really wrote itself. So that was a good example of, my goal is to do this, and without the tools to do it, I know I wouldn't have gotten there, right? And so someone taught that system to me, which apparently is a thing because I've Googled it since then, and it is a known technique. And it works, especially for an overwhelming task. And if you think about something like moving out and launching on your own, that's pretty overwhelming. Literal things like, how do I pay a bill? How do I call the electric company to turn it on? Where does this thing, all that at once, and you don't know the systems or how to do it? Of course it's going to be overwhelming, or something you can't control. I'm really good at figuring out steps to things now, but every once in a while something will hit that I have no control over. We're dealing with this roofing project we've had on our house, and it's messed up all of our venting, our fan venting and all this. And it's this ongoing slow drip thing that I can't hurry along, and it's in the hands of other people, and it's driving me crazy because I can't be the one to complete it. It involves other people. Those processes move very slow. I don't know if the outcome is going to be successful. So imagine that, like moving out, all those things. You haven't had that experience. Like you said, it's practice. You haven't had that reinforcement of, oh, if I do this, if I pay this bill, my lights will stay on, right? I mean, you literally haven't done those things before. Sending neurodiverse folks off to college, it's no wonder a lot of them crash and burn.
Dana, well, let's even go simpler than that.
Yeah.
I haven't had any exposure to do my laundry, to make a meal for myself, to transport myself, walking from place to place. How about making a transaction with a bank card? How about choosing my own clothing? How about these types of things? Yeah. And I say, and you wonder why we're anxious about the launch, because inevitably this is where anxiety comes from. And if I don't believe that I can rely on myself, and when I say that, I don't mean that I have to do everything by myself. I'm just saying that I have the skills to do it for myself, and that I can take care of myself. Right. If I don't have that, you think you might be anxious about going off on your own?
And so do you think you might look unmotivated?
Yeah. Right. It's like, no, I'm not unmotivated. I'm crapping my pants. Thank you. Like whatever it is. So I think, like, you and I could talk about this all day, but I think the biggest thing, for our audience is if you are in a position, don't use motivation as a way to describe somebody. Yeah. Please.
Yeah. Or yourself even. Yeah.
Right? But do your due diligence. Get a good understanding. I love what Dana's saying. Understand the barriers to the actions. And if you're like, oh, I actually don't want to do that. It's like, then that's the issue, right? Yeah. So look at the barriers, see what's getting in the way, see what's tripping you up. Yeah. And then problem solve from there. Yeah. And I think we can avoid the shame and the moral diagnoses. And the deprecation, and the blame. We can avoid those things if we do that by just understanding really the idea of motivation.
And how can you know how to do something when you don't know how to do something? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, right? But how do you know how to do something when no one's ever taught you and you've never done it? If you've never done laundry, it's not intuitive. All those dials on the washing machine, what the hell do all those mean? Yeah.
All the choices.
Yeah. People that have had
how about on a laundry machine, okay?
People that have had all that stuff done for them, you have I don't want to even, maybe handicap is the right word. You've handicapped them, to use an oldism, because now they don't know how to do it, and they should. Right. I joke about that. I was folding laundry when I was 3, which was probably slightly neglectful on my parents' part, but hey, I learned really early and knew how to do it. But
no, I love it. Experience is the best teacher, right? Experience is the best teacher. So, all right, everybody. You know what, Dana, what do you think about calling our audience the Marvels?
Yeah.
Just the Marvels.
Well, they are, because they're marvelous. They're Marvels.
Wow, I love it. I love it. All right, Marvels. I thank you for being here. Thank you for being in our community and in this space. And if you're here at the end, that means that you have listened to Dana and I ramble on about motivation. So we thank you for being here. We absolutely love you. We want this to be a positive space, and we hope that you leave this you leave this podcast feeling something better.
Yeah.
Positive.
And understanding better.
And understood. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye.